So they are no longer two, but one. And therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate. When they were in the house again, the disciples asked Jesus about this, and he answered, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery. It's a hard scripture, isn't it? Let's go back and look at verse 1. Jesus then left the place and went into the region of Judea and across the Jordan, and again crowds of people came to him, and as was his custom, he taught them. I'm just going to validate again what we're doing in the pulpit each week when you hear someone talking out of the Word of God and taking us through one of the Gospels. The Gospel of Mark is great, and I know it's on Kirk's heart that we all get introduced to a little bit more of what we might call kingdom theology. And that's important in the Vineyard, and I think it's important that we kind of come each week expecting to understand a little bit more of this life of Christ, this life that so wonderfully participated in the arenas of relationship building with crowds that would come and surround him, with the 12 that did small group life with him day in and day out. And in the 3 words here at the end of this first verse, he says, and he taught them. And so Jesus is encountering, he crosses the river, he's in Judea, and he's about to participate in another teaching environment. And then somebody approaches, verse 2 and 3. Some Pharisees came and tested him by asking, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Well, what did Moses command you? He replied. Here come the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees were the religious leaders of the day, always wanting to discredit Jesus. And because Jesus was a threat, and they bring up the touchy subject of divorce. And they're kind of waiting for that gotcha moment. That idea that if they can kind of nail Jesus in a response that just doesn't really look right or sound right, that they could discredit him and they could kind of say, gotcha. And so they ask, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And here's the crux of the text. The Pharisees are going to gauge the appropriateness of Jesus' response based on matching it with their current standards of the day. And they're looking for his comment to see if there's a clause or a circumstance or a category or a condition that would match their reasoning on how they looked at divorce. Is it lawful? Come on, Jesus. And they were preoccupied with these things. And as students of the law, it wasn't uncommon that they had add-ons and accommodations over the years. And there were many schools of thought, even in Jesus' time, even amongst the Pharisees, regarding different interpretations. And so they want to hear from Jesus. Is it lawful? As if they're wringing their hands. And is Jesus going to say that you're going to be in or you're out of societal acceptance because you had a divorce? Or will he ally with the Hillel Jewish school that permits divorce only under certain circumstances? Well, isn't it ironic? We're kind of wondering too, a little bit. Even today, we're kind of wanting a little clarity around this if we can get it. Right? Yeah. And here's Jesus' reply. Well, what did Moses command you? And right into verses 4 and 5. The Pharisee said, well, Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away. And Jesus comes out in verse 5 and he says, it was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law. And the Pharisees really gave a more objective response. Well, Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away. Contextually, this was a legitimate way. In fact, it was even needed for women, this certificate, because it protected them from getting taken advantage of, and it gave them the opportunity to remarry. Hey, men could walk away from their marriage and abandon their wives. And it's kind of like leaving them out to dry a little bit. And this certificate became a legal process that restored some civility in it all. But men could literally throw their wives out because they did not like their cooking. Can you imagine? Well, bad stroganoff over here. That's it. I've done. I'm going to send you out on your way. Hard to imagine. And then in verse 5, actually the Pharisees' response was weak because they could cite what Moses had to say, but they couldn't state truth as why it was said. And this is what Jesus does. This is why he's always profound. Jesus clarifies. Here's the truth. It was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law. It was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law. Hearts that are hard. What do you think of when you hear that? Hearts that are hard. I think of soft-hearted guys sometimes. You know, they wear their feelings on their sleeves and they kind of give in. And so maybe hard-hearted guys are kind of the opposite of that. What do you think? Hard-hearted, what does it look like? They did what they wanted. They lived with their pride. They gave themselves the discretion to say, I want out. Their ability to offer forgiveness was shallow. It was stunted. It was impaired. Because when you are so caught up in being full of self, you lack empathy. And empathy is your ability to understand how your actions affect someone else. And when you're stunted there and you're not very good at it, you see a lot of full of self kind of behavior and decision making going on. And a hard-hearted person is just that. And Moses says, I can't change a man's heart. Therefore, we'll change the law or the practice regarding marriage and implement a certificate of divorce process. Now, this having a hard heart is important for us tonight, you all. And it could be preventing our movement into grace. And so when I think of the attitude that you want to take into marriage, if it's we do what we want, if we say what we want, if we don't know how to forgive, if we lack empathy, if we hold grudges, then we're being setups for being people that are hard of heart. Let's go on, verses 6 through 9. But at the beginning of creation, this is Jesus replying, at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate. And Jesus is quoting from Genesis. Genesis, a little bit of the end of 1 and 2. And what's the word saying here? That two, when getting married, become one flesh. They are no longer two, but one. And if you go against this, you go against what God has designed. You can't undo the original plan of making husband and wife one flesh. It says, let man not separate. The rules of marriage, men and women, is oneness. The Hebrew word is basar. One flesh. Translated one-skinned. The idea that all flesh was contained in one skin. Marriage, two people coming together, contained in one skin. And if the two are separated, there is still something of the essence of each person embedded into the other. Try separating it out, and you're going to find rips and scars. So the result of marriage, people, is oneness, and it happens when you get married. And your view should revere this definitive statement. Man cannot undo what God has made one. Man cannot undo what God has made one. Okay, let's relieve the stress a little bit. Everybody, let's just breathe. I've got an illustration. Sitting before me is a couple of bottles an empty vase. And symbolically, this might look familiar to many of you. Not uncommon at wedding ceremonies that the bride and the groom at one part of the ceremony will go off and they'll each take their cup. Let's see how the video's looking. That's good. I like that. That is so cool. Okay. All right, we've got the female and the male, and symbolically they say that the two will become one. And so they go up to this vase and they sprinkle their sand in together. And they do this, and the people at the wedding ceremony go, "That is so cool." But what's happening here, people? Look at these granules of sand. They're meshing together. It's taking on a different look. It's almost as if it's a different composite. It's two people becoming one. And it's a different look than what we had here. And we need to try to grasp that the beauty of marriage, as Jesus so is quick to remind the Pharisees that are taking him on, that we've got a really unique look here. And it can't be separated. I met John James down here earlier, and he said, let's just see somebody try to separate all these granules of sand. John said it would probably take 40 years. Can you imagine trying to do it? What are you going to do? Get a tweezer out? This is the new look. If you're on your first marriage, you'll get this. If you're on your second marriage, whoa. Third, whoa. And our response, no way for the first marriage to be separated. Well, this is different, and it's coming off a little bit condemning. But I'm telling you, marriage belongs to God, and this is truth. Divorce belongs to man. And it doesn't change me, says God. And divorce doesn't separate out a couple. It can protect them, but marriage belongs to God. And you can add rules, you can seek loopholes, but you can't change God. That's hard teaching. Let's make it even harder, shall we? Verses 10 through 12. When they were at the house again, the disciples asked Jesus about this, and he answered, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery. Further processing, you can just imagine the disciples kind of saying, whoa, and they get back with Jesus a little bit later, and Jesus does a little more processing with them because they're in small group, and that's their great opportunity to go deeper and understand even more. And so it's as if Jesus is saying, if you think because you have a divorce certificate that you've secured your way out, God says marriage belongs to me, not the judge, not the state, and if you remarry, you do commit adultery. And the disciples are getting clarity, and they're going, whoa. And the Gospel of Matthew talks about this. There's a parallel account in Matthew 19, and in 19 verse 10, the disciples are saying to themselves, maybe it's better not to marry. Whoa. And Jesus says, not everybody can accept this word. And if you're going to look for a clause, and if there's more of the word to look at with our topic today, in Matthew 19:9, there is a clause, and it talks about marital unfaithfulness, and it is a circumstance, it kind of is a category that becomes part of the conversation that scholars have wrestled with for some time about this area of divorce. And I'm not here to give the scholarly treatise tonight around that and whether there's kind of an in or an out based on marital infidelity, but I am going to do this. I'm going to say, please, in lieu of getting bogged down and getting preoccupied of this, realize that the challenge is to caution against your steps of moving into a pharisaical game. Don't be like the Pharisees. Know the word and know where your heart is hard. And careful of only hearing what you want to hear. Because some people, and I've worked with people to challenge them to be better thought managers in their lives, they reason like this. Well, there is an exception clause, and I think I've got an out, and I'll feel better if others can tell me it's okay. And the Hillel school allowed divorce in these circumstances, but if I can proof text Deuteronomy 24 and match that with Matthew 19, I think I can construe that I'm on the right track for what I want. And what I think Genesis 2 is really saying is that there is partial definition in the word study on paneo, infidelity, that I think I can construe what is needed here. And my good wise friend gave an objective amount of feedback, and I think I heard him say, therefore, I see the permission, and what I'm looking for, I think, does exist. When we make divorce and remarriage a process of a rationalization game, we're going to be subject to hard-hearted appearances. Does that make sense? So you may think that you're where you're at in your ability to forgive, but maybe you're not really all the way there. And you can despise a spouse because you think less of them. You can find yourself disconnected. You can look down upon weaker people. You can be more impressed with getting free because you can't handle the commitment, hold grudges, and carry un-Christ-like eyes toward each other. The rationalization game is complex and it's dangerous. And this is the check I want you to give yourselves tonight. Redirect any hard-heartedness in your relationships. Redirect it. What does that entail? What does that mean if I'm going to redirect any potential hard-heartedness in my life? You move the gospel message to grace. The grace that God gives you. In your movement and involvement in sin, it can be washed away. Forgiveness exists, and Jesus paid the price. Here we're getting these great teachings from him in the gospel while he's doing life, and this is the very God-man that moves on and dies on a cross for you and I. So Jesus in his word and in this passage today faithfully reminds us that there is an original plan. And in lieu of offending anybody in this talk, please, marriage is a serious union. It can't be separated, and if it is, it's sin. Stop the hurt games, the guilt, the dread, and come under sustaining grace. And truth is tough, and Jesus' words are strong. And just as on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, any man looking at a woman lustfully commits adultery with her in his